should get more back for Trey Young. And yet, people who cover the Wizards say you don't take Trey Young unless you get some picks with him. I'm suspicious. I've said this before about a few players, Trey Young included, but I've always led with this. James Harden, for me, in this era of NBA basketball, is the most joyless player to watch. Trey Young isn't that far behind. And the reason is I'm not a fan of 37 dribbles and a fadeaway three with four guys on offense standing around and watching. I just don't like that style of basketball. In fact, I think it's getting harder and harder to play that kind of basketball and go deep, deep, especially with some of the defensive teams that are out there. See OKC last year in particular. You know, OKC was defensive-led. I mean, they also had a superstar player, and there was some level of iso ball, not like what we saw the year before with the Mavericks and Luka Doncic, not like we see with James Harden, not like we see with Trey Young. I think personally, when the defense doesn't have to move and they only have to guard one player, I think that's a hard way to win 4 out of 7 in 3 consecutive series in May and June. Now, with that said, Trey Young at 6'2", 6'2.5", is one of the best smaller pick and roll, pick and pop scorers in recent NBA history. He is a dynamic scorer. He really is. He's a dynamic playmaker. Again, pounding the life out of the basketball, playing a lot of ISO and two-man basketball. It's the way he thrives. I mean, he is high usage. He is high shot attempt numbers. He's hurt, by the way, right now. And there's a chance we won't see much of him at all the rest of the season. Remember, the Wizards need to protect themselves from losing their first-round pick. We've gone through this a few times the last few days for those that missed it. The Wizards, if they end up after the draft lottery with the 9th or lower selection in the first round, they lose it to the New York Knicks. If they end up with the 8th or higher selection in the first round, they keep it. Now, the goal would be to end up in the top 2 or 3 in a draft that's pretty loaded at the top, most people think, in 2026. To guarantee that they do not have any chance on draft lottery night of ending up with 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th position in the first round, they have to finish in the bottom 4. They've played well recently. They've actually played really well recently. Now, they got blown out last night by the 76ers, but if you've been paying attention, they went on a stretch before last night. They had won 5 of 7. They were sitting there in the standings, overall league standings. You got to keep an eye on that. You're not keeping an eye on playoff standings. They're not going to make the 7 through 10 play-in. They had the 4th worst record. If they get to the 5th or 6th or 7th worst record, 5th or anything, better than that, they risk losing their first-round pick. That's not part of the plan. Part of the plan is to end up with a bottom 4 spot. You get thrown into the lottery. You'd love to be in the bottom 2 so you have the best odds of getting number 1 overall and picking, say, A.J. Dibansa from BYU as a potential co-peat, Arizona, Boozer, Duke. However it flushes out by the time we get there. I think the kid from BYU has a really good chance to be the number 1 overall. But you want that shot. You got to have that shot. This is part of the plan. Part of the plan was not to win too many games with Chris Middleton and C.J. McCollum or Trey Young now. You don't want to win 26 games, 28 games, and be the 6th worst team in the NBA. We'll see. I'm guessing we're not going to see a lot of Trey Young in 2026. That's my guess. I think there would be risk in playing him too much. I am intrigued. Of course, he's a dynamic player. He's a dynamic scorer. The idea of him with Sarr and George and some of the other young pieces, Koulibaly, and whatever they get next year, I think they're doing it the right way. They're giving themselves the best chance 2-3 years down the road to start winning 40, 45 games a year, and then 4 or 5 years down the road to win 50 plus a year and have a chance to contend. This is how you have to do it when you're the Washington Wizards and you're not a destination for already established superstar players. But I'm just telling you, as a basketball nutcase and big fan, there are players that I just don't find any joy in watching. Number one overall is James Harden. And there are others, and Trey Young's always been a part of that mix. It can be fun some nights when he's going off and he's not missing, and the bombs are being let loose from 35 feet, Steph Curry style, Trey Johnson style. Man, he's got some range. Yeah. We'll talk more about this with Ben when Ben jumps on with us at 11. I found in reading about this trade for about 2 hours last night, the idea that almost everybody has a view one way or the other about the team not getting enough back. The Hawks, what are you doing trading a player of that ilk for C.J. McCollum's expiring contract and Corey Kispert? If you're the Wizards, why would you take on Trey Young? He can't guard anybody. I mean, he is an awful defender. He's a non-participant as a defender. Just not interested in defending. At 6'2" in the NBA, when you're not a good defender, and then on top of that, you're not interested, you're thinking about how many seconds of the shot clock can I pound with a dribble before I let a three loose on the other end. That's a problem in today's league. You get attacked over and over again. He will be and has been a major defensive liability. And so the flip side is, how are the Wizards taking back this guy who can't guard anybody, who has to be ball dominant, who has a $49 million player option, which they can afford with all of their cap space, and they're not getting back at least two second-rounders or a first-round pick? And the Hawks are saying, how do you trade this guy for McCollum and Kispert? Interesting. I have not looked at the grades on this trade yet, from some of the dudes at ESPN. I will check that out. I am interested in that. I would imagine that Washington, because it's McCollum's expiring contract, because it's Corey Kispert, and they didn't have to give up anything of their young nucleus, that maybe they got the better of it when the experts graded out. But again, I think the interesting part of this is that nobody seems to think either team got enough back in the trade. All right. I wanted to read this email that I got yesterday. It's one of my favorites in a while. It comes from Will. Will writes, Kevin, I was thinking about old Danny Boy. If Snyder was still the owner, would Dan Quinn be the coach today? Immediately when I read that, I said, no chance. Because here's the twist, right? And this is not a knock, please. This is not a knock on Jaden Daniels' mother. But we know she, has an opinion. She's not afraid to express her opinion. She is very much involved in her son's life, professionally, personally, etc. Apparently, according to all accounts, incredibly bright, smart, the whole thing. But if Dan Snyder were the owner, all it would take, because she would have, of course, access with a quick phone call to Dan. Dan, Cliff is staying. Dan would immediately get on the phone and call Adam Peters and say, fire Dan Quinn, elevate Cliff Kingsbury to head coach. And by the way, if you don't do it, you're fired. That's the way that would have gone down. Good one, Will. I think you're right. I don't think Dan Quinn, after this season, especially given the dynamic with the quarterback, would be the coach. The quarterback, and by the way, the backup quarterback, they love Cliff Kingsbury. The mother made that very clear on social media Sunday night. And if Dan were the owner, of course, he would have succumbed not to the football people, but to the parent of the superstar young player. Appreciate that, Will. So I got this from Scott in Fairfax. Scott wrote, Kevin, I think you missed the biggest part of the story with Kingsbury. Jaden will be on his second offensive coordinator in 3 seasons. And if Cliff's replacement is good and Jaden doesn't get hurt next year, that guy will be gone and Jaden will be on OC number 3 entering his 4th season. Not a great situation, which is why Harris should have hired an offensive head coach to begin with. Like, I get the larger point, Scott, of what you're writing. You know, I will just start with this. That's not the biggest story. The biggest part of the story is not that Jaden may be faced with 3 offensive coordinators in 4 seasons. The bigger part of the story, the biggest part of the story, and it's not even close, is Kingsbury exiting this team and what were the reasons why. You know, the fact that, let's not act like we all saw this coming. Diana Rossini had the report over the weekend. Ben had some follow-up reporting, and that's the first time anything like this felt real. Now, did we talk about during the course of the season occasionally if Cliff were to get a head coaching job, would it be a devastating situation? It didn't feel like it would be as devastating to lose him as it did the year before. But Cliff had a good year, people. He had a good year. You know, there was a lot to question. I still think that Minnesota game was pivotal. I think the sequence at the end of that first drive, which Dan Quinn was clearly annoyed with after the game, and then on the Monday following the game, and then Cliff Kingsbury later on in that Minnesota week prior to the Giant game during his Thursday press conference, we read the quote the other day. He basically fell on his sword and said, I got to call a better game. There are 30 plays in that game I should have called that I didn't like the call of, the nature of a play caller. And, you know, remember that game, how much of a difficult time they had protecting against Brian Flores' scheme, you know, loaded up line of scrimmage. Are they coming with 0 or are they dropping back? It was the same. Steve Suter said, I don't understand what Washington's doing. They are timing up the cadence, the snap count every single time and getting the quick jump. They're just blowing up every play. You've got to change the snap counts, you know? And so there was some frustration there with Quinn after that game. I think there's a chance that game was the moment in which it was legitimized in Dan Quinn's mind. Hey, if we don't turn this thing around and make a big run here down the stretch, you know, where it would be really, really hard to let him go, my gut is to kind of try it a different way. That was not very good. I'll remind everybody that in that particular game, J.J. McCarthy played like Dan Marino. He played like Joe Montana. He played like John Elway. Our defense is so blanking bad that J.J. McCarthy had the best game of the year against us. Do you know what? I went back and looked at something yesterday. I know I've referenced the Raiders game in week 3 as a game that should have been a little bit of a tell on how bad the defense was, even when it was healthy. Do you know that Geno Smith's best game of the year, not even close QBR-wise, passer rating-wise, was against Washington in week 3? Remember, Ashton Genty ripped off a couple of runs. That guy, number 1, Trey Tucker, had 145 yards and 3 touchdowns against our defense. Now, they couldn't stop us. You know, we rushed for over 200 yards in that game. That was the game where Jeremy McNichols broke like 19 tackles on one play and ran 60 yards for a touchdown. Chris Rodriguez and Krosky Merritt and McNichols, you know, ran the hell out of the ball. I mean, that was a game in which they ran the football. Marcus Mariota was involved significantly in the run game. Mariota threw for over 200 yards and a touchdown. But Geno Smith, with that terrible Raiders team, had his best passer rating and his best QBR game of the season. J.J. McCarthy had that in the Minnesota game. But still, as bad as the defense was, and the offense got 3 swings at it. I think it was 3 in the first half, right? Max, that was the game in which basically they went on that 98-yard, 19-play drive that took like 12 minutes. Mm-hmm. Wasn't it like a 12-minute drive?
Yeah, it was really long.
Let me just check that to make sure. 19 plays, 98 yards, 12 minutes and 1 second. It had to be. Look that up to see if that was the longest touchdown drive of the year. I bet it was. That's an outlier. I bet you. See if there's any data on the longest touchdown drive of the regular season in 2025. I bet it's that one.
Google AI says the longest touchdown drive of the 2025 NFL season in terms of plays was 19-play drive by the Chicago Bears against the Dallas Cowboys in September.
How many yards and how much time?
See, that's where Google AI falls short.
Well, I'll find it right now. Against the Cowboys. Oh, I do remember that. I do remember that game. I had the Bears that day, I remember. 19 plays, 76 yards, 9 minutes and 54 seconds at the end of the third quarter. So that's not anywhere near the Minnesota drive. AI's wrong about that.
Good. Finally, another thing.
Yeah. So, look, the Minnesota game, I think, was pivotal all the way around. It's a guess. It's not anything I know. But it just, when you go back and you think about the reaction, how annoyed, how angry Quinn was, Mr. People Pleaser was not pleased after that game. And then Kingsbury really kind of, took it and fessed up at the end of the it was an easy game to criticize Kingsbury. They move the football, and Rodriguez is averaging 8 yards a carry on the opening drive, and they go tackle-eligible throw, another throw, and a 4th down throw, which, Debo should have caught. It was in his hands, should have caught for a touchdown. And instead of just handing the ball off to Chris Rodriguez, remember this, too, about that game, all right? It's all kind of flooding back. Remember this, too, about that game. Jaden was not allowed to be used as a runner. An option runner or a designed runner. What does Cliff like to do with Jaden and with Marcus in those short yardage situations? They like to use them as potential option runners at the very least. They did not have that. That was the game in which, even Quinn admitted we were not going to run Jaden in that first game back the way, we had. So that was not an option to him there. But look, back to Scott's, email to me. First of all, the biggest part of this story is not Jaden's number of offensive coordinators in the coming years. The biggest part of the story is after 2 years, Cliff Kingsbury is out. And he's not out because he got a head coaching job. Now, he might end up with a head coaching job, but that's not why he's out. This was a parting of the ways. This was in my opinion, and I said this yesterday, this was a Dan Quinn decision. I do believe that. I believe that this was Dan Quinn just deciding, I want to do something different here. On some level, Dan Quinn making that decision when, anybody objectively would have said that Cliff Kingsbury is a good offensive coordinator, and B, actually overachieved given what he had to work with this year. I mean, he basically had his best playmaking skill position players lost for the majority of the season. Quarterback, of course, leading the way. And they finished, number 4 in red zone offense, 12th in yards per play, 4th in rush offense, and really top half of the league on average across the board in most of the key advanced and even traditional offensive statistical categories. You can't objectively take your emotion out of it wherever your emotions lie. You can't objectively look at Washington and what they lost and then look at the final numbers and say that the offensive coordinator didn't make more out of less this year. He did. Now, Quinn's moving on from him because Quinn wants to do it differently. Whether it is more under center, I think that's probably not the significant part of it. I think the significant part of it is he wants to see them be more of a in-game feel. We're running the football. Let's stick with the run. We've got a chance to go downhill. We've got a chance to play slobber knocker football, And that's not necessarily what Cliff leans into, even though they run the ball at a high level and they've been top 4 in rushing, 4th this year, 3rd last year. But I think Quint wants more of that. I think that the no huddle and the pace of play, even though it was in the middle of the pack, especially with a bad defense, when you're, the adjustment would have been this year, knowing that the defense was even worse and that offensively you weren't going to be able to score on every possession because you didn't have the same players on the field, maybe really slow it down. He did slow it down. He basically slowed it down at a 2x rate from the year before in terms of where they finished in the rankings. They were 8th in pace of play in 2024. They were 16th in pace of play in 2025. And I think Quinn, on some level, it was ballsy for him. He better be right. I'm not saying he is right or he isn't right. He just better be right. But it doesn't change my opinion that on some level, it's kind of ballsy for him to say, I don't feel it. I don't think it's right. Many of you, when I said this yesterday, said, well, why did he pick him in the first place? Well, things change. I mean, there's more information. And 2 years later, he feels differently than he felt in January of 2024. I understand that. But the way he feels now, doing something about it for somebody who really is a bit of a, let's stick with it. Let's, pleasing and the whole thing, for him, kind of ballsy, I think. He's like, I don't want to get to the end of next year. And I'm being called into the office to be let go. And I don't want to regret that I didn't make the change that I thought I should have made at the end of 2025. But look, I think, Scott, the big story is, how did we get here? Cliff Kingsbury's gone. Dan Quinn changed his mind about him, decided to move on from him. And then what do they have as the solution? I mean, I am definitely a believer that you don't do this without having a solution, unless it became untenable. And the Jordan Schultz stuff from yesterday, I'm not hearing that there's like this major rift and major meddling situation with the front office. Is it possible that there were things back in training camp with Terry and things during the course of the year that reeked of an agent disseminating that information to Schultz yesterday? This was the story about where is the tweet? Here it is. Jordan Schultz yesterday. Part of the issue the Commanders have had in the building is the front office meddling with the coaching staff on personnel and which players to use, an ongoing problem dating back to 2024 when they were having success with the team struggling this year, reached new heights, and there were notable disagreements. Moreover, I've not gotten the impression Dan Quinn wanted to move on from his coordinators. The entire disconnect is one to watch as we head into 2026. There's a lot of S going on there. By the way, I think Dan Quinn did make the decision on Cliff Kingsbury and Joe Witt Jr. Now, there's a collaborative relationship there. There's no doubt. But that's what I believe. And that report does reek of agent disseminating information to an NFL reporter to get out there, as in potentially Cliff's agent, maybe, anyway, so now back to one last thing on Scott's email. The idea that Jaden might have his second offensive coordinator in year 3, and then if that guy's really good and that becomes a head coach, let's just say, has his third offensive coordinator in year 4. That's not a massive, unique thing. Like, it happens. John Harbaugh is not a defensive head coach, but he was a special teams coach. He's more of a CEO coach. Lamar Jackson's had, I think, 3 or 4 offensive coordinators at this point. Jalen Hurts, I think, is on number 5 since becoming a starter. Sean McDermott in Buffalo for Josh Allen as a defensive head coach has had 3 in the last 5-6 years for Josh Allen. DeMeco Ryans, CJ Stroud. Stroud's on his second OC in year 3. It happens a lot when there's great offensive success and the head coach isn't a play calling offensive head coach. I get it. You're not wrong, but it's also not unique. I would also just point out that when they hired Dan Quinn last year, the 2024 head coaching class was a defensive head coaching class. Quinn, McDonald, Raheem Morris, Gerard Mayo, Antonio Pierce. Washington's interviews were primarily with defensive guys because there weren't a lot of offensive guys out there. Bobby Sloak and Ben Johnson were kind of those guys. Now, Dave Canales got hired in Carolina, but they interviewed Quinn, Raheem Morris, McDonald, Aaron Glenn, Anthony Weaver. You know, they interviewed Bobby Sloak, and then they interviewed Zoom-wise Ben Johnson, but did not get the live in-person interview with him. He declined that. All right. I do have some thoughts on the offensive coordinator slot, and there was some reporting yesterday on the defensive coordinator search. So we've got a lot to get to, but up next, Denton will jump on with us. We've got a playoff game tonight and a playoff game tomorrow night. He'll help preview next.
Pick up your book bags. Grab your notebooks. It's time to go on campus with Denton.
Give me my theme music.
Before we get to Denton, a pretty big story breaking in the NFL. Adam Schefter reporting that Mike McDaniel in Miami has been fired. Mike McDaniel is now available, potentially to be an offensive coordinator. Now, I'll tell you, and I'm going to get to what I was going to get to on the show today. Max and I talked about it before. I am becoming increasingly interested in the possibility that Washington stays within their own building for Cliff's replacement. And the obvious choice would be David Blau. Anthony Lynn, and Brian Johnson obviously would be in the mix. But David Blau is the guy whose star has been ascending since the moment they hired him. And there's outside interest in David Blau. Could be one of those things where they don't want him to leave the building. But Mike McDaniel's now available. And maybe that's a bit of a surprise. And I don't know if that means Harbaugh's going to Miami. Schefter's very clear here in his reporting saying that this was a move made by the Dolphins independent of John Harbaugh's availability. Mike McDaniel fired in Miami. All right, Denton is with us, as he is every Thursday. This will be we'll probably have you back on that Monday, Championship Monday. But we've got a semifinal game tonight in the Fiesta Bowl, Miami and Ole Miss, and we've got a semifinal game tomorrow night in the Peach Bowl in Atlanta between Oregon and the number one undefeated Indiana Hoosiers. Denton, of course, is the pre- and post-game host on our station on 106.7 The Fan for Commanders games. He's also a big-time host at Westwood One Sports and the host of College Football Overtime on SiriusXM. So, real quickly, what's your reaction to Mike McDaniel being fired? Interesting, huh?
Yeah. Interesting, yes, and yes. I would take him here in a heartbeat. He has a relationship with Dan Quinn, but is still a Shanahan-style offensive coach. And if he could get a great year or two out of bum-ass Tua Tagovailoa, imagine what he'd do with a good quarterback like Jaden Daniels.
Yeah, I mean, count me in on Mike McDaniel as the offensive coordinator. But it'll be interesting to see what might be available for Mike McDaniel other than offensive coordinator possibilities. But it's getting interesting for sure. All right, I'm excited about tonight. We get games. We get a game tonight. This is much more fun to watch games of these sort of environments and significance, and it's a playoff Final Four that nobody anticipated before the year started. Really, of these four teams, maybe Oregon was a team that people thought could win a national championship or be in the Final Four. I love kind of the new blood. Let's start with tonight, Miami, Ole Miss. How do you see it? Who do you pick?
I think you might end up being a very happy camper by the end of this one. Ole Miss has kind of taken on this like team of destiny role, but they don't actually feel like a team of destiny. They feel like a team of vengeance because it's more so like the story is more about Lane, it feels like, than it is Ole Miss at this point. It's like the conversation is constantly about Lane. They constantly get asked about Lane. But it's given them, I think, in the eyes of the people, like, hey, this is the team of destiny. We got to root for them. I think Miami is the actual team of destiny because they're playing their best football, and their best football is borderline unstoppable because when you can get after the quarterback at the level that they can get after the quarterback, you're going to win a lot of football games. And I think against Ohio State, they found the formula on how to win at this stage of the season. You get a lot of pressure on the quarterback, which they did a great job of now in two playoff games, and you really prioritize running the football. At this stage of the season, if you're running the ball and having more rushing offense than you are passing offense, it usually means you're going to win a football game. And that's what they had against Ohio State. Mark Fletcher was really, really good, averaging just under 5 yards a carry in that one. I think they've started to put it together, and they're realizing that, yeah, we're paying a lot of money to Carson Beck, but we're not asking him to do a ton, and that's your best formula to win. So I think they figured it out. That number being at 3 is maybe a little bit shorter than I thought. I think Ole Miss is getting the SEC bump, but I like Miami tonight.
You know, I kind of like Miami tonight as well. And to be honest with you, that's the game I want to see. I want to see Miami and Indiana. I want to see these two grown up, trenches-based teams go after each other. And I want to see what Miami's defensive front can do against Mendoza and Indiana in particular. But back to the Ohio State quarterfinal game. You're right. Like that was you and I both loved their win over Texas A&M. For a 10-3 game, for those of you that watched it, I think you know what we're talking about. That was an incredible football game for 10-3. The quarterfinal game against Ohio State felt the same way, with one difference, Denton. Carson Beck made every big play for that offense. Every big third down throw, couple of big third down scrambles. He didn't do anything in the A&M game. It was all right. Fletcher at the end, and you and I both thought it should have been Fletcher from the beginning in that game. But Carson Beck and his experience, I think, really showed up and was significant, and I think it'll be big tonight against Ole Miss. You say
yeah, and their offensive coordinator, Shannon Dawson, did a fantastic job scheming up against a really strong defense. I mean, we've been talking about Ohio State's defense for the entire season, both as a college football fan because they've been such a good defense, but then as a Commanders fan as well, because you're looking at guys that you might be available to draft in 2026. And it always felt like when they needed a big throw, not only did Carson Beck make it, but it also felt like guys were winning matchups. You know, C.J. Daniels, who came over from LSU and prior to that was at my alma mater at Liberty, he made a couple of big catches. We've watched Malachi Toney make a couple of big catches over the course of the last two games. I mean, whenever there was a play that needed to be made, it felt like Beck made the right decision, but it also felt like they schemed guys open really, really well. I just think tonight, in specific, Ole Miss is not a good run-stopping defense. I think that's where the bread is going to be buttered. If you just unleash Mark Fletcher on to that defense, I think good things are going to happen.
Look, I don't want to go overboard on Carson Beck. You and I have been talking about him since the beginning of the season when we both thought Miami might be the best team in college football, and it would come down to his performance. And he soiled himself on, a Friday night against Louisville, same thing in overtime against SMU, which is why they had to win 5 in a row and pray to get into this thing. I'm glad they did get into it, and they're proving what they were, at times during the regular season. But that game against Ohio State, I think, was a clutch performance. And I'll tell you why. He didn't offer up running opportunities against A&M. He looked frazzled against A&M and against an excellent defense. Some of those scrambles on third down where he put his head down and went for it, I thought was big time. And I think it inspired that team. And I think he's going to – look, you're right. This is not the same defensive challenge that Ohio State was, although a championship game against Indiana would be. And that's why I want to see it. But I like Miami tonight too. I don't really – and I'll have my smell test will be later on in the show if I have a pick for tonight. I don't feel great about the number. I think it's kind of mixed both ways, but do you like them to cover the 3? It's right now sitting at 3.5 in most places.
Yeah, if they're going to win, I do think they cover it. I think they've shown the ability to really score, but I think their wins, they're winning not at the buzzer. I think if they're going to win this one, it'll be covering that 3. And I guess it comes down to Cristobal in late game scenarios potentially. Right. But I would point this out, Kevin. Like, we are nearing the point, assuming he does not have a blunder, where he's going to graduate from some of those things. Like, we'll be able to look back and be like, wow, remember when he did that silly thing against Georgia Tech, and we can all laugh about it, but it really
like Andy Reid did.
Right. It really eases that if you get to a championship and then win a championship.
No doubt.
And I can't imagine that anybody outside of, the critics are still thinking about, we're worried about him. So I actually think he's done a really good job. It's been quiet because there's been so many other storylines, specifically with the team they're playing and their former head coach. But I think Cristobal has done a pretty decent job over the last, not just the 2 playoff games, but really the end of the season.
Yeah, let me just, for those that aren't familiar with Mario Cristobal, the head coach of the Miami Hurricanes, he is truly one of the coaches that, fans like Denton and I refer to as just buffoonish with clock management, game management. There's an all-time boneheaded loss where they could have been taking knees against Georgia Tech, and they were running plays, fumbled, and they ended up losing the game. But to your point, Andy Reid had that rep for years, didn't know what he was doing at the end of games. And once he started to get to Super Bowls and win Super Bowls, all of a sudden that goes away, and it could go away, to your point, with Cristobal as well. All right, let's get to Friday night's game, tomorrow night's game, Peach Bowl, Atlanta, Indiana laying 3.5 against Oregon. Who do you like and why?
So this is the game that I'm most looking forward to because these are two of the best teams, but it's really two of the best quarterbacks. I love Dante Moore. Fernando Mendoza would have been my Heisman pick as well, but Moore in specific, I really think Dante Moore is excellent and has really good potential to be really excellent. And he did not play well the first time these two teams squared off. But the way that Oregon has played since that game and some of the challenges, if you just look at some of their wins, you say, wow, they beat an Iowa team by not that many points. Well, that Iowa team is a good Iowa team. It was on the road.
Rain.
You have weather affecting that game as well. It's cold.
Game. It was a great
game.
Just
a great football game. Yeah. They were dealing with some injuries. Well, now they're getting healthy. Gary Bryant Jr. was back last week. DeCorian Moore's now been back for a couple of weeks. And those are two of their best wide receivers. So I'm really excited to see how they're going to match up against an Indiana team that they've already seen before, because we know this. It's really difficult to beat a team twice in the world of college football. It's difficult to do in the NFL too, but in the world of college football, because there's so little times that you're going to play a team twice. So them being able to have said, hey, we have gone up against Indiana. We know how they play. We understand the physicality that they're going to bring. I do think that gives them at least not an advantage, but at least a little bit of confidence to say we kind of understand what we're walking into, and that gives us a little bit of leverage compared to like Alabama had no idea. I mean, they had no idea what they were walking into. Nick Saban tried to tell them on College Game Day. They thought they were going to come in there and punk Indiana, and they got their ass whooped. Indiana's a great football team. Cignetti is excellent, but I'm really excited about this one. I kind of like Oregon because I like Dante Moore, but this one I think is going to be an absolute shootout.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about the shootout thing, but I'm with you. I think this is going to be a hell of a football game. You've been right about Dante Moore. I wasn't so sure, especially after that Indiana game, because he did not play well. He threw 2 picks, and it could have been 4 in that game, and then really did not play well against Iowa until that final drive. I mean, that was one of the really, really good football games of the year, NFL or college. Like you said, I mean, Kinnick, it's dark, it's cloudy, it's rainy. Iowa's awesome defensively, and he needed that last drive, and he made a couple of big plays on that final drive to get him into that walk-off field goal situation. So yeah, I hope you're right in one way, but in the other, I think the better final is Indiana-Miami.
I do too, because I think any time you're going to get a final with Indiana, it is in this year in particular, it's going to be good for the sport, because Cignetti is, I think people are falling in love with him all over again. And then if you don't love Cignetti, you probably love the quarterback. I mean, the dynamic between those two guys, I mean, Fernando Mendoza is just like Kirk Cousins light. I mean, he looks like Kirk Cousins. He speaks like Kirk Cousins.
Well,
so the dynamic
no. There's a difference in personality, but there is a similarity style-wise. Definitely.
It's the perfect dork combination, but that dork is like really good at football. But like the dynamic of like this happy-go-lucky, I love my teammates, I'm happy to be here quarterback versus the head coach that literally wants to kill you on every single play is hilarious to me. And I love watching these two guys and the way that they interact. And we've been asking for this for a while, and that, hey, we kind of want new blood at the top, and we're getting that with the 4 here. But I think you really get that with Indiana winning this whole thing. And it puts a lot of different programs on, not the hot seat, but on the hope seat. Maryland is an example of that. Northwestern is an example. Like all of the teams that, have been bad for a really long time have hope that if we just get the right amount of money, if we get the right leader in here,
coach, though, at those
you need a coach. You get the right leader in here, and we get the buy-in, because everyone at Indiana is buying in. Like I constantly Indiana selfishly has been really, really good to me this year in terms of the players that they give me after games. And I always ask the players that I talk to, like, what drew you to Cignetti? And he is apparently behind closed doors. He is like the best human being of all time. He's infectious. He understands. He's super personable. He's down to earth. He's a lot of things he's a lot of boxes that you would love to check as a college head coach, and he checks them all. So I think he has done a fantastic job. And I think it's really good for the sport when you have really, really good coaches that are really, really good dudes winning championships.
All right, last question for you, because I think for a lot of our fans, they are watching college football for the first time and they're like, oh my God, Ruben Bain, Akeem Messidor. I'm like, these guys are unbelievable. David Bailey. So among those three, let's just go with those three because they are edge guys. Bailey, Bain, Messidor. You're at 7 and you have a choice of those three. Who would you take?
So if you love Messidor, you're trading back. I think you'll be able to get him later
probably
in the first round. I would take David Bailey. I think he, from a versatility standpoint, I think he is the best, is more twitch. His bend is a little bit better. Ruben Bain is a power guy. I mean, he is, I was texting back and forth with somebody about this yesterday. He is one of the, at least very recently, one of the best power rushers that we have seen in college football. He just does it from, different positions. And we've seen over the last 2 games that he's a game wrecker. And all of the film people and the draft people will tell you the same thing. Watch the tape. And we've seen 2 games. He dominates the tape. And I'm excited to see tonight what that's going to look like, because you could argue, I don't think you would really make this argument, but maybe you could argue like, hey, the first 2 games, maybe they weren't quite sure what Ruben Bain is. Ole Miss is no excuse. You've watched that guy dominate the game for 2 games in a row now against 2 good programs. Whatever plan they have for him, I think they're going to execute, but now we'll be able to see, can he out execute an executed plan? So I'm really excited to see what he's going to look like, but I would still prefer David Bailey at 7.
Great job. Enjoy the games. I'll talk to you. See you.
Yep. See ya.
Ben will jump on with us. We'll talk about Mike McDaniel's sudden availability. We'll talk Trey Young trade with Ben as well. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the Team980.com. The Wizards were basically 100-1 to win the NBA championship before the trade, and they're 100-1 to win the NBA championship after the trade. Trey Young is a Wizard. Ben Standig joins us. Ben is going to talk football with us. We'll get Ben's reaction to Mike McDaniel's now availability potentially after he was fired. If you're just tuning in, Mike McDaniel fired this morning in Miami, according to Adam Schefter. But the big NBA news last night was that Trey Young was traded to the Wizards for C.J. McCollum and Corey Kispert. You covered the Wizards forever. This is as much your passion as anything else is. So your reaction to it is what?
I think this is one of the most perplexing, bizarre, fascinating trades I can recall. I don't like it from the Wizards' perspective, which we can get into, just that I'm not a huge fan of small point guards who don't defend and are overly ball dominant, and then especially inserting them into a team where the whole point of the last 2 to 3 years has been to develop these younger players and build a winning culture. And Trey Young makes a lot of highlights, but I don't know that he's a winning basketball player per se. But what's so fascinating about this trade is, depending on who you talk to, either the Wizards got a great deal because you view Trey Young as this, multi-time all-star player, and they didn't have to give up any first-round picks to do it, and McCollum and Kispert doesn't seem like a big loss. Or Atlanta did a lousy job because all they got for Trey Young were these two guys who were, good players, but not standouts, no picks. Or people look at it as, wow, Atlanta got rid of Trey Young without having to give up any picks.
Yeah.
And that's where I land. And we can talk about that more, but that's why it's fascinating. Like, some people, I feel like I'm through the looking glass on this compared to when I'm hearing other people who think this is a great deal for the Wizards. And I'm like, I don't know about that at all.
So I was fascinated to get your take, and you and I have not talked about this at all. We talked about something else this morning before the show, not this. I said at the beginning, I'm always suspicious when I essentially hear on one side from NBA, NBA people who cover the sport. I'm hearing Atlanta didn't get enough for, a 4-time All-Star, 1-time All-NBA selection, arguably one of the greatest scorers. He's not the greatest player in Hawks history. Dominique Wilkins is. That's just, that's not a debatable thing. But not even the greatest offensive player. Dominique is that as well. But I digress. I was surprised to read Atlanta sent this, all-time exciting, dynamic scorer, and they got back an expiring contract with C.J. McCollum and a backup, shooting guard. And then other people are saying the Wizards take on Trey Young and a $49 million player option in 2026, 2027, and didn't get additional picks back. Josh Robbins was on with me the other day, and he said the only way you make this trade is if you get, some picks back with Trey Young. That makes me suspicious. It's like nobody really wanted it. Nobody seemed to really want him that much.
Right. Agreed. I think the thing that I find incredibly frustrating, and look, is there a world where this does work out swimmingly for the Wizards, where Trey Young maybe has a little bit of an ego check and says, like, okay, whatever I was doing here is not quite working. Maybe I got to change things. And look, he's only 27. He's had success. Who knows? Okay, there is a world where that could happen. My issue is that who cares? Because Atlanta had zero leverage in this deal. The point is that for Atlanta, they have been a much better team this year when Trey Young has not been playing. They've got some other guys, some other players who are they want to make more of the central focus of this team. So they wanted to move on from Trey Young, period, end of story. but not many teams could even remotely come close to taking on his salary in a relatively simple way that Washington could, because the Wizards are obviously playing for the future and they have a lot of space. What was the Wizards' rush? Just tell Atlanta, hey, we're here. We'll do it, but we don't have to wait till today. I mean, we can just, we're good with CJ McCollum, who's played really well this year, maybe too well in terms of the Wizards winning, but we can just, hey, CJ McCollum said out last night, we can kick him in the foot and he'll have a well, we can keep him out of the lineup if we have to. So to prevent this team from winning too many games. So give us a first, or whatever, 2020, 2032 first, whatever it might be. Give us something for our troubles. Instead, they just made this move. And the other part of this is that, and I know you know this, is that the Wizards, the last part of this entire rebuilding thing is essentially this year they've got a top 8 first-round protected pick.
Right.
So if they finish outside the top 8 in the lottery, they lose that pick to the Knicks. That is a huge deal. This is considered to be a loaded draft. Hopefully they could pick top 3, but this is considered to be a really good draft. Why would you want, even if it's not, just to have the pick, why would you want to give that up for Trey Young? The only way this trade makes any sense, as it is that the Wizards say, Trey, okay, welcome to DC. Now go go cool your heels over there. You're dealing with a quad injury. Terry McLaurin missed 7 of the 8 weeks with a quad injury. You might miss that many now too. So unless he's going to get put in ice and not play much or at all, this trade makes no sense to not get a first, to potentially lose a first, and do it all for a player in Trey Young, who I just can't believe many people in the league buy as a viable star for a winning team.
I made the same point about him defensively. He's terrible. I had somebody text me, a coach that I talk to all the time, said, they do have right now, if you're not paying attention, the leading shot blocker in the league. That's Trey Young's protection, SAR. Fair enough. And he is leading the NBA in block shots. For those of you not paying attention, the number 2 pick for the Wizards 2 drafts ago. So I guess to me, the real question here is, after next year, is he on the roster moving forward or not?
Well, that to me is the part where, are they playing 3D chess here? Like, is there a world where not only does Trey Young not play much or at all this season, thus protecting that pick, but now, they may look at it and say, hey, look, these kids have been playing a lot better. Alex Sarr is a much different player than he was a year ago. Keyshawn George has turned into this really nice, point forward type, and that's a unique aspect to his game and to the league that you want to keep going with. Trey Johnson is shooting from Steph Curry range. I'm not saying he's Steph Curry, but he's shooting from crazy distance and is been very mature for a kid who's still, as a teenager. And, there's some other things they've got going on too. So if you decide, hey, by next year, we think this group, we're ready to plunk in some type of veteran player, and we can use Trey Young's $49 million expiring contract to move on and get somebody. Again, that's 3D chess. That would be really interesting. This would be a way to both sabotage this year without the league yelling at you too much, perhaps, but then getting something more for going forward. That's cool. I just don't want to hear Trey Young is part of the future and they plan to extend him, because if that's the case, I am just lost for words as to how the Wizards with Winger and Dawkins have shifted so dramatically from getting these switchable athletes. They were trying to build this winning style. Again, I'm not saying Trey Young is not without gifts, but winning basketball, this does not appear to be where he's at. And all you have to do is, again, look at what the team that he was a star for all these years got in return. No picks, just a couple of, bench pieces. That is not that is something, that is a team saying we don't covet this player or we're holding out for the max. We're saying we need to move on from this player. That should be an indication as to where he's being viewed in the league right now.
Talking to Ben Standig. One more thing on this trade. I mean, if you're being, I'm suspicious of just the reaction and how it's all over the board. But I'm with you. Like, if you're going to take this guy on, you can't put in jeopardy your draft, position in your first round pick in 2026. And number two, you got to get something back with him. But beyond that, the skeptic in me would say, do you think Ted thinks that he can sell more, courtside seats with Trey Young playing this year and next year? Because I asked Josh Robbins that question about, is he a draw? My personal view is he isn't. He's, for me, a joyless player to watch. I've talked about him, and Harden's the leader in that in terms of just miserable players and their styles. I can't stand it. Does he have that kind of star power that they'll, bump up some of their big, ticket items for games?
Well, so here's the thing, right? If we put the Wizards, the people who pay attention to the Wizards in sort of a pie chart, the smallest sliver might be people like you and me who actually still give a crap and pay attention. The vast majority, at best, are super casuals who are probably aware that Trey Young is a big deal. So from that perspective, you might be able to sway a bunch of people who aren't paying that close attention, who don't really understand the dynamics here as to make it sound good. Now, that is, I think, the worst case scenario, because that would mean that the owner said, hey, I'm over this. I tried to stay with this course as long as we could, try to accept that we're going to have poor crowds, bad records, all that stuff. But look, I mean, obviously, Ted, the reason why it was such a dramatic shift to go from the Ernie Grunfeld, Tommy Shepard times with the owner really having a say in what's going on to this is because he seemingly was giving Winger and Dawkins, the freedom to do what they felt they needed to do to turn it around. So that would be a massive bummer. And the worst part would be it's right there. You just have to wait another, the rest of the season. You've already done this. Like, well, what is Trey? Trey Young's not going to get your season tickets up. The season's already almost halfway over. Just play it out another few months. Now, again, this may not be the case, but if that were to be the case, that would just be unbelievably disappointing that he could not wait. And, look, they didn't give up a ton of stuff to do this. It's just that there's the opportunity cost because of the money he cost them the rest of this year and next year, and just the style of player. I just don't see this. If your goal is to win, and rather than just make the play-in game, I don't see how you think Trey Young's your guy, period, end of story.
All right, let's talk about Mike McDaniel all of a sudden becoming available. Where are you on how this will flush out OC-wise?
I mean, look, the all of this coordinator, coach, head coach, conversation everybody has is mostly based on connections until there's more specifics that come through the pipeline, through interviews or things like that. That you can't find a more connected guy to the scenario here who has a lot of swag, a lot of upside, who's shown to be a good coach than Mike McDaniel. He was here under the Mike Shanahan group, of course, the one we all know about that got put on our TV screens for a while there, showing all the guys who became head coaches. He was one of those. He went to he was with Dan Quinn, and Kyle Shanahan in Atlanta. So Dan Quinn's already been around this guy, and Mike McDaniel has been very public that Dan Quinn, as much as anybody, helped him become sober. Struggling with alcohol. Right. So it's more than just, a coaching connection. It's a personal one. And then McDaniel was with Shanahan in San Francisco, where Adam Peters was. So you can't have the only way this would be more as if Mike McDaniel's best friends with Josh Harris's kid or something. Like this is a pretty overwhelming level of connections. So if you're going to make this move on a Cliff Kingsbury, and we keep saying, well, what are you doing that's getting better? I don't know if they had an inkling, but McDaniel would make a ton of sense in that regard. Now, all that said, what didn't ultimately work in Miami for McDaniel? Clearly, the Tua Tagovailoa situation wasn't great. The Dolphins fired their GM. You watch McDaniel from afar. It seems like his ego is a bit, perhaps needs to be been unchecked at times down there. What does that mean for any of this? But if you want the experience name, if you're not willing to take a bigger risk on, say, a David Blau as an internal, hire. You get him, before he breaks out. I don't know how you're going to find a better candidate who checks more boxes than Mike McDaniel.
I totally agree with you. I also envision this. If he came in here next year and they had great success with Jaden Daniels and his scheme, and let's just say they had to overcome another bad defensive football team, there's no doubt he would be in demand, and you'd be faced with the decision as the owner to keep him on as the head coach or to let him walk back into another head coaching position. I'm not saying that that would be a good problem to have. I wouldn't shy away from that problem. I'm just suggesting the obvious. If he came in here and had great success next year, and then on top of it, defensively, they weren't very good.
Yeah. I mean, look, this is the argument that our guy Grant Paulson was making back in 2024, and we've talked about this on my podcast, the three of us. I'm not saying anything I haven't said to him or you have, but like Grant's issue at the time was like he thinks they should hire an OC because if there's success at OC as a head coach, because if you have success, you want that consistency to stay on the offense with the young quarterback and not have to change it all the time. Versus in this case, like you're saying, Cliff Kingsbury could have potentially left to take another job if McDaniel goes, and now you're constantly changing the voices around Jaden Daniels. So that argument is fine. The other parts of Grant's argument that work is crazy. But this part of the argument makes a lot of sense, and it's what you're talking about. So, but look, even if you go the David Blau route and think, well, we've got more time there because he's still so young, he's not really done this, that he probably doesn't go straight from a successful OC year to a head coach. But, who would have thought he would go hypothetically from retired 2 years ago to becoming an OC in 2 years. So it should that to happen. So anybody who's going to be the OC for Jaden Daniels is the potential to leave. But you're right, McDaniel would be a much likelier one because of he's already shown some capabilities, and he's a fun personality. There's a lot you can sell there if you're a team as a head coach if he's coming off a year with Jaden Daniels with a lot of success.
So let's talk about real quickly before I let you run what we were talking about before the show started. Had nothing to do with Trey Young, and that is you and I both are kind of on the same page that we believe that there may be a hire at that position that has familiarity with Jaden Daniels. Now, when you look at that list that we've all compiled of outside guys, nobody has strong ties to Jaden Daniels, any ties really to Jaden Daniels other than his offensive coordinator, who's now at Notre Dame, who is his offensive coordinator at LSU. The people with ties to him are still in that building. And the three names that you would think of are Anthony Lynn, Brian Johnson, and David Blau. Of those three, the guy that's star has been on the rise. Everybody has been told this since he was hired, and has other interested teams outside the organization, is David Blau. The McDaniel thing adds an interesting twist, and I'd be all in on McDaniel as a fan of this team. But if McDaniel gets another gig or isn't available, there's a chance it could be the next OC inside that building right now. You agree with that, right?
Yeah, I was saying to you that, I watched Hard Knocks this week, so you guys didn't have to. It's been a tough year for the Hard Knocks group to watch them take the NFC East. But there was a scene in this last episode, and it wasn't really about football.
We played it on the show yesterday. Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. So you look at the people in that room. David Blau's leading the meeting. You've got Marcus Mariota and Josh Johnson and Jaden Daniels and Sam Hartman, and I guess Jeff Driscoll was in there, who just came back a few weeks ago. And the reality is that every single one of those people could be gone, right? I mean, are they keeping Hartman again? If Blau is, not kept as an OC, is he going to go somewhere else? I think Mariota could follow Kingsbury out the door. Josh Johnson's 39. And now all of a sudden, forget the coordinator part. You've now taken away all the people in Jaden Daniels' direct orbit. I get Dan Quinn is there and teammates, although Bobby Wagner could be gone too. You've taken now all the people in his life who are part of that, almost like the non-football parts, like the ones who make him probably feel as comfortable as possible, and now they would all be gone. that I think would be a bigger deal than like losing just Kingsbury, because now again it is just you're upending his entire social world almost. So keeping Blau, again, not saying that Blau is a Jaden whisperer, but he has been around the whole time. He has been here. They have worked closely together. Cliff as the OC is not with Jaden every minute of the day because he's got other responsibilities. And, Blau was the one leading that meeting now that Tavita Pritchard is gone. So, who, by the way, also already left, So, yeah, I think keeping Blau could be a way to give Jaden some form of normalcy, consistency. Also, with Blau, you could decide, hey, Blau is tied with Kingsbury. We want to just generally keep the Kingsbury system, but dial back the amount of shotguns and the amount of
it'll be a combination of Ben Johnson and Cliff Kingsbury. Those are his two influences.
Right, for sure. And also, the reality is, amid these reports of there being tension between
I was going to ask you about
Kingsbury and Peters or whatever. Kingsbury is a larger than life type figure, right? He's been a head coach. He's been, a top player in college. And we all know there's just like, he's got this swag about him. There's an aura about Cliff Kingsbury. David Blau would be like, okay, much more controllable, right? So Dan Quinn, not saying Dan Quinn would be calling the offense, but, they would be able to say more, hey, we're doing this, we're doing that, but here's what we want you to do. You go call the plays, do all that, but we're going to have more say over personnel or whatever. And Blau would have to be like, sure, cool, because he probably isn't getting this opportunity otherwise. So there's that component, and I don't think that can be dismissed of how important that is. Now, I'm not aware of any connection between Mike McDaniel and Jaden Daniels. So there's that. By the way, that would be a kind of a mouthful to say all the time, McDaniel and Daniels. So I think that would be something you would have to consider. And I guess to a degree, part of that would still apply, like we said, with Brian Johnson or Anthony Lynn. I just don't, Anthony Lynn has been there, done that, and I don't know that makes a lot of sense moving forward. And, Brian Johnson has been there, but, his time with Philly obviously did not work out, so I don't know where they or him as a coordinator.
There's another part of the Blau thing, too. It would be very, I think, easy to pitch, not that they should worry about this, but we just couldn't let him leave the building. That would resonate. Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, Kevin O'Connell, Matt LaFleur, all of the people that left the building. He has been considered to be a guy that is eventually going to be an OC and maybe a head coach since the moment he took the job here. People have raved about his intellect, about his ability to communicate. And it's the same stuff, that everybody heard about other people in the building. But of course, the team was owned by somebody else at the time. So the presentation, if it ended up being David Blau, is easy. We couldn't let him leave the building. He's too talented. He's too good, and he's the perfect fit for Jaden.
Yeah, no, that would be. The irony there would be like none of the people in the building have anything to do with that whole thing.
I know.
We've all had to. No, but I'm just saying that would be ironic if that's the reason. If the new group decides to, that they have to sort of do what the other group never could do. By the way, I believe David Blau's wife is the sister of Christian Gonzalez. So even though Christian Gonzalez never got here, you'd have some connection to a guy that everybody laments about all these years as well.
But that aside, Blau aside, Mike McDaniel's now available potentially to be an OC in the league in 2026. He worked with Dan Quinn in Atlanta. He was in San Francisco when Adam Peters was there. As you described, and I forgot about this, the way he talked about Dan Quinn in the lead up to the Madrid game, about how Quinn was so impactful in his life at a very difficult time. They've got the quarterback that would excite, I'm sure, Mike McDaniel. I don't think anybody would be upset if Mike McDaniel was in with Cliff Kingsbury out. With that said, before that breaking news, you and I were starting to think that Blau was a decent bet, odds-wise, had McDaniel not become available. We'll see what happens next. Thanks. Oh, real quickly, Patrick Graham, do you think that that's a significant request for interview. He's got experience. That's not a guy that comes in here, right? If he comes in here and Dan Quinn has to, handhold because he's never done it before. So I thought that was meaningful. And the other part of it is no ties to Quinn that I could find. What was your reaction to the story that Patrick Graham, the DC with the Raiders the last 4 years, was with the Giants before that, that the team requested an interview with him?
Yeah, I look, there's going to be a bunch of interviews, and it's good to take, to talk to different people with different backgrounds and different experiences and all that. But like you said, it would be a shift away from the Dan Quinn system. And look, I think that's the important question. And I think you can certainly make the argument that should happen. But since it's Dan Quinn's system, if he's not going to hire Raheem Morris or Jeff Ulbrich to keep it going, it just feels like to make that level of a switch, that like a Brian Flores or a Jim Schwartz, guys who have been the top of the food chain at that spot, would make more sense to do that for than. I'm not saying Patrick Graham isn't a fine coach, but I don't know that he certainly hasn't had the same level of success as those other guys. So it might be a fine call in a very general way, but if you're really going to blow up your whole system and change everything, I don't know that that's the level of coach that I'd be thinking Quinn would do that for.
Raheem Morris, Mike McDaniel. I think Morris ends up in LA if Chris Shula gets a job personally. And then the other thing is Jeff Ulbrich, also a possibility, the defensive coordinator at Atlanta, in addition to the Patrick Graham stuff. We've talked about all of the Quinn guys. One last thing, because this is something else you and I have talked about the last couple of days, and I don't think it's been on the air. Marcus Mariota very likely follows Cliff Kingsbury wherever he goes. Agree or not?
Yeah, I've been writing about this aspect, but I think people are just sort of assuming. I wrote a few weeks ago that Washington should get aggressive and re-sign Mariota. Part of the reason why was if he hits free agency, I think it's all over. Now, maybe I shouldn't say all over, but because we didn't necessarily know that Cliff would be leaving, although he could have been going for a head coaching job. But yeah, look, I think Mariota, I don't think it was as much of a lock that he was coming back last year as people think. And obviously he was happy to come back. And I'm sure if the circumstances go a certain way, he'd be thrilled to come back as well. But he played a lot this year. I asked him the other day, maybe it wasn't the way you wanted to get in the lineup, but what did that do for you, in your career? You may not have thought you were ever going to play this much. And yeah, it certainly sounds like a guy who got the itch again to be, being out there on the regular, and whether it is with Cliff or somewhere else, I think he's probably shown enough to be somebody's bridge starter, spot starter, competition perhaps for somebody. And, this is other than Kyler Murray's out there. We'll see about Malik Willis's market. And then what? I think Mariota is probably next, if I'm thinking about this right, in terms of veterans that you would potentially target. And so
I think Cousins is going to be targeted if he wants to play football again.
Oh, sure. Of course, yeah. Of course, I forgot that one, but you remember Cousins. Good point.
It's usually top of mind for me. All right, I got to run.
No, but you're right. Cousins would be there too, but Mariota should have opportunities.
Yep, I agree. All right, thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Ben Standig, everybody. Tony Skinn is the head coach at George Mason. The Patriots are 15-1. And to top their conference standings. He'll join us in about 10 minutes. I've got a What Do You Got when we return. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the Team980.com. So my what do you got has nothing to do with our football team or any other team in the market. Although, let me just reiterate, I think Mike McDaniel would be a home run hire. I'd be excited. I think many of you would be. But I also think a very strong possibility is that someone familiar with Jaden ends up being the OC. And those options are inside the building. And the number one option there would be David Blau, because he is the guy whose star has been on the rise. And there's a lot of interest in him outside of the building. Already a request from Detroit for him to interview for their available offensive coordinator position. The what do you got is this. You know, I was a big Deni Avdija fan, as many of you know, and I questioned when they traded him. I thought I was watching a future All-Star when he was here. And I thought he really got better in his final year as a scorer, as a shooter, as a decision maker. He started to shoot the three at a much higher percentage than he had. If you're not following Deni Avdija's career since he got traded to Portland, and I don't expect that you would, last night he went for 41 points in a 103-102 win over Houston. The Trailblazers have actually won 4 in a row with Deni Avdija averaging 34.3 points per game, 8 assists a game, and 7.8 rebounds a game. He's shooting 50% from the floor, 40% from beyond the arc, and 82% from the free throw line. He's averaging 26.3 points per game on the season, 7 rebounds, 7 assists. He's a good bet to become an all-star this year. He is just 25 years old. He just turned 25 years old. In looking for, all-star players, I think they had one. And he's not here anymore, and he is blowing up. Now, there are flaws in his game. He's not necessarily always the best, handler of the ball. He's averaging an S-load of turnovers this year. He's at like 3.8 turnovers per game, so he gets a little bit loose with the ball, gets a little bit hurried up. I've watched them a few times this year because I'm a fan of him, but he's 25, just turned it, and he is getting better and better. And I think you're looking at a perennial all-star kind of player in Deni Avdija in Portland. And they are having a surprising season because of him. They have won 4 in a row. They've moved up into, the 7, 8, 9 range in the Western Conference. Long way to go, but nobody had Portland being any good this year, and they are competitive because of Deni Avdija, a first-round pick of the Washington Wizards not that long ago. All right, when we come back, we'll do something a little bit different on the show today. We're going to talk some college hoops, not with the Maryland head coach, not with the Georgetown head coach, but with the head coach of the best team locally right now, George Mason. Tony Skinn will be our guest next.
All righty, folks. Happy Thursday, everybody. We'll start off with the big news from last night. In case you missed it, the Washington Wizards made a trade sending C.J. McCollum and Corey Kispert to Atlanta in exchange for point guard Trey Young. This is largely considered a salary dump for Atlanta as they attempt to retool on the fly, potentially looking for an AD trade. Meanwhile, the former Oklahoma point guard had the Wiz at the top of his list of preferred trade destinations. Unfortunately, this trade didn't do much to help the Wizards last night. They suffer a 131-110 loss to the 76ers in Philadelphia, but it was a bad night all around in D.C. as the Caps take an uninspired loss to the Dallas Stars. Now, they were without Tom Wilson and Alexei Protas, but the boys in red unable to generate any offensive pressure, and that's hard to do when you give the puck away 24 times. Plus, finally, we got some NFL coaching news as John Harbaugh is taking some time to collect his thoughts before taking any head coaching interviews. He will likely begin speaking with teams next week. And Mike McDaniel has also been let go as the Dolphins head coach as they look for a new head man and a new GM as well. This update is sponsored by the Team 980 YouTube page. Just open the app, type in the Team 980, hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live every day from 10 to 1. You can catch programs like Take Command throughout all of this offseason. Don't forget to hit the like button whenever you do decide to join us and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC sports. And that is what's trending.
So, we got a little discombobulated. It's not Friday, is it, Max? It's Thursday.
No, it is Thursday.
It's Thursday.
We do have a college football
Yeah.
playoff game tonight, though, so I can see where your confusion started.
Yeah, so George Mason head coach Tony Skinn is booked for tomorrow at 11:40. Why did we book Tony Skinn for tomorrow at 11:40? George Mason is 15-1 and atop the A10 standings at 3-0, and they've got a huge game on Saturday at the Patriot Center against VCU. They are the best team locally in town right now. I'm actually surprised they haven't gotten votes in either of the two polls. I think they deserve them. He's doing a phenomenal job. Tony Skinn was on the staff with Kevin Willard at Maryland, then got the George Mason job. Remember last year, there were a lot of you out there, and I know some of you, who were very much insistent on Maryland hiring Tony Skinn. He's a really good coach, and Mason's good. He was the A10 coach of the year last year. They went 27-9 last year. They were 20-12 in his first year, and they're 15-1 right now. His record in 2.5 seasons is 62-22 and 27-12 in the A10. He's doing a hell of a job. But I thought that we, for a moment, were having him on the show today at 11:40. And that was my fault. That wasn't Max's fault. It certainly wasn't George Mason's fault. He'll join us tomorrow at 11:40. So what we're going to do is we're going to do some power rankings right now, and we're going to rank our NFC playoff teams 1 through 7. And later on in the show, we will do our AFC playoff rankings 1 through 7. So I'll start with this. To me, and I'm going to go 1 through 7 in order, okay? I am sticking with my belief. You know, if we go back to early November, I said, I think we're going to see Seattle and the Rams in the NFC Championship game. But I was thinking the Rams would be the 1 seed. I really thought the Rams were the best team in the league, and I still don't want to back off that, even though they haven't played great. But I think the Rams are going to represent the NFC in the Super Bowl. Now, Seattle's defense and only having to play 2 games at home. And by the way, if the Rams win, which I think they will in Charlotte on Saturday, they'll probably play Seattle next weekend in the divisional round, unless there is an upset. Unless Green Bay beats Chicago, which, by the way, I think is in play, or San Francisco upends Philadelphia. Then you wouldn't get the Rams, Seattle until the NFC Championship game. But I'm going Rams 1 and Seattle 2. So I've got a 5 seed as my number 1 power ranking NFC playoff team. Number 3, I'm going Philadelphia.
Ooh.
Because I think defensively right now, they are still, with Seattle, those are the 2 best defensive teams in the NFC playoffs. They've got Jalen Carter back. I kind of like the matchup with the 49ers. In some ways, I think the Packers may have been a more difficult matchup for them. The 49ers are terrible on defense. Like, if Philadelphia is going to have a good offensive game in the playoffs, it should come Sunday afternoon. I've got Philadelphia at number 3 overall in my NFC playoff rankings. Now, after that, I really think you could put them in almost any order. I mean, you've got, the Bears who, have kind of been living right this year, kind of like Washington last year. But the big difference with the Bears is they take the ball away. And the other big difference is, all due respect to Caleb Williams, who's having a really good season and a big jump forward season. It's not the season Jaden Daniels had. I don't think you're able to ride Caleb Williams to an NFC Championship game, even though they are the 2 seed and they could play back-to-back home games. But I actually believe that the 4th best team, and it's going to be proven on Saturday night, are the Green Bay Packers. I think the Packers have some juice left, and we're going to see it on Saturday night at Soldier Field. I like the Packers to win that game. Number 5 on the list, I'm going to go with San Francisco. I'm worried about them defensively. Offensively, look, they got completely shut down by Seattle in that game. That was one of the more impressive performances of the season, given what the 49ers had done, leading up to that game. I mean, Seattle completely took them out of their game. They did nothing offensively. Can the Eagles do that to the 49ers? They can. The difference is the Eagles, I don't think, are going to be the threat offensively against that bad defense that Seattle was. Seattle should have scored a lot more points in that game. They missed 2 field goals. They backed up from the 1-yard line with a crazy, sack when they should have been running the ball. But I got the 49ers at number 5. I've got the Bears at 6 and the Panthers at 7. I'm not a believer in the Bears. Love what they've done. And I think it's been a Ben Johnson kind of a year. Don't discount what Dennis Allen and that defense has been able to do with the takeaways, but it's not a good defensive football team. You saw that in the 49er game. I mean, think about this. They could not stop the 49ers and gave up 42 points. And the next game, the 49ers could barely make a yard against Seattle. So I got the Bears at 6. I think the Panthers are obviously power ranking out the NFC playoff teams, the worst of the playoff teams. I think the surprise with my rankings would be where I have Green Bay and where I have the Rams.
It's interesting because when I give you mine, I pretty much have them in the exact same spots, Kevin. The Rams number 1, just because of how Stafford's season has gone. It did fall off a little bit, but it's late in the season. Guys are trying to, push through injury and play for the long term and trying to get into the playoffs and all that. So I do think the Rams are going to be my number 1. Seahawks number 2, Packers 3. Number 4.
You got the Packers 3.
Yeah.
They're the 7 seed.
It's
okay. And you and I have them I have them as the fourth best team. You've got them as the 3rd best team.
You know what's a fun fact about
why do you like the Packers? Give me the fun fact first.
So the fun fact is Matt LaFleur is, I believe, the oldest head coach in the NFC right now in these playoffs at like 45, 46, something like that. It's just very weird when you look around the NFC or when you look around the NFL in general and just see how this blurging of youth in the head coaching circles.
So how old's Kyle?
Kyle is 46.
Did you just say Matt LaFleur was 45?
LaFleur is also 46, both born November 3rd, December 14th. So he just edges him out.
Just barely older than Kyle?
Barely. By like a month and a half. Not even.
That is kind of a fun fact to know and tell. I mean, Matt LaFleur looks so young, too.
I know.
He is young, relatively speaking, depending on your perspective. But I know, I mean, right now, the youngest coach in the NFC playoffs is Mike McDonald, right?
I believe that is correct, but I'm not 100% sure on that one. But the reason I like the Packers so much is, yes, they lost Micah Parsons, but they have 2 quarterbacks that know and can play very well in their respective roles. If Jordan Love does end up going down, I feel like Malik Willis is more than competent to get them a win in the playoffs against a lot of these teams. So I really do like the Packers' chances as the season kind of goes on. But number 4, I've got the San Francisco 49ers. I can't bet against Shanahan. And towards the end of the season, Brock Purdy's turned it on, man. I am notoriously skeptical about Brock. I just, Mr. Irrelevant. I don't think he deserved such a huge contract, but man, he is coming up in big time moments for him throughout the stretch of this season. So that's why they're 4 for me. The number 5, we got the Chicago Bears. Again, I'm also skeptical of Caleb. He has had, like you said, a really big step forward season. That defense is turning the ball over with the best of them right now. But I just, like I said, can't get cute out of a coach, man. And Ben Johnson is very, very good, very, very talented. But there are these key moments where you need to make the right decision. And a lot of times I'm not seeing that decision from him. So that's Bears at 5. Eagles 6. We differ greatly on Philadelphia. Their offense just has been sputtering all season. They haven't really been able to get the run game going with one of the best backs in the league in Saquon Barkley.
If they can't get the run game going against San Francisco's defense, then that's going to be a big red flag, even if they survive the San Francisco game.
Yeah.
This should be the game in which Philadelphia can run the football. Like against our defense, even with their backups. I mean, Tank Bigsby was going for, 5 yards a carry. They should be able to easily, even against a stacked box, Barkley should have a good day.
I would hope.
If Philadelphia's offense doesn't look more cohesive, smoother, more functional against the 49er defense, then you can write them off in terms of a Super Bowl visit, even if they win the game against San Francisco, because they wouldn't be good enough against Seattle's defense or the Rams defense. No way.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. And then number 7, I got the Panthers coming in that final spot. The trenches, they're built for it. Their secondary is really good, but just they're not on the same level, man. There are levels to this stuff, and it's the Rams. I think they might run them out of their own building, but we'll see. I think I like the Rams and the points in this weekend.
Kellen Moore is the youngest coach in the NFL. He is 37 years old. Mike McDonald is 38. And then Ben Johnson is 39, and so is Sean McVay. Those are the coaches that are under 40 years old. I can't believe Sean is still in his 30s. Wow. Yeah, look, the NFC, Seattle, to me, if the NFC champion doesn't come from the Seattle Rams Eagles trio, I'd be surprised, not floored, because of the nature of this season and how crazy it's been. But I think the NFC participant comes from that group, and those, that's the 1 seed, the 3 seed, and the 5 seed in the Rams. The Rams playing at Carolina, they're the biggest favorite in NFL playoff history for a road team. They're an 11-point favorite as a road playoff team. No team in the history of the NFL playoffs post-merger has been a bigger road favorite. They were that big of a road favorite when they lost to Carolina like a month ago or whenever it was. I think the divisional round matchups, if you were to get the seeding to hold, you would get Rams, Seahawks, Bears, Eagles. I just think, like you do, it sounds like, I think the Packers are going to win Saturday night. But the Bears have had what Washington had last year. They've had that. The sun's been shining in the right way on them all season long. So we'll see. But I kind of like the Packers on Saturday night. I may have a smell test pick before the show is over on tonight's playoff game. Stay tuned for that. Ross Tucker, who called Washington's finale with Kevin Harlan on Sunday in Philadelphia, will be our guest next. All right, it's a busy week in the NFL. Busy week here. Mike McDaniel, if you missed the news, fired in Miami. Certainly, he would be an interesting hire to replace Cliff Kingsbury here in Washington. Joining me right now is Ross Tucker. Ross called the game Sunday with Kevin Harlan in Philadelphia, the season finale. He's done a great job calling games. The Ross Tucker podcast is outstanding. You can follow Ross on X and on Twitter at Ross Tucker NFL. Did you know, I was thinking about you as you were calling the game, and I was wondering, what you knew about the Kingsbury situation. You and I have talked about this before, but I think it's interesting how guys who are calling games that get that opportunity to sit down with coaches and quarterbacks, and sometimes you guys get more information, even if it's on background to kind of use in the broadcast. But did you have a sense that the Kingsbury thing was coming?
Not from my conversation with Cliff. I didn't really go down that road. I did ask him if he would consider like a college job again, and we kind of talked about the craziness that is college football right now. But when I spoke with him on Friday, I think that was before some reports started to trickle out Saturday and Sunday morning that maybe it was more than just him potentially going for a head coaching job somewhere else, and that maybe he would be moving on regardless. I think it was maybe Diana Rossini. I think Ben Standig wrote something about it. So
both of them.
There had been stuff that I had seen, which is why I referenced it during the game, but, it wasn't hard and fast, and, it wasn't like something I wanted to expound upon, but just I felt like there had been multiple reputable reports that it was at least something worth mentioning.
We'll come back to Cliff and the openings here. This has been this has been a disappointing season, a miserable season, really, here in DC after what we had last year. Following the near quarter century of Snyder misery, and so just a tough year here to watch this team. And I'm wondering, going into this season finale, did you get a sense as to, why they thought they had the season they had?
Yeah, I think the things that jumped out, obviously the injuries was the biggest one. Just doing the research for it, Jaden Daniels and McLaurin played 3 games together. I mean, Daniels played in 7 and came out of 4 of them. I had done the Bears game earlier in the year on the radio that Jaden played in. And it was like once people discovered without McLaurin that they didn't really have an outside receiver that could consistently beat man coverage, that put them in a really tough spot. Terry's that valuable. I think you saw that again Sunday. I mean, he had to have, Kevin, look this up or get Max or somebody look at it. He had to have set the record for number of pass interference or holding penalties drawn in the game.
I think it was 4. I don't know if it's a record or not, but I thought the same thing. I think he drew 4 defensive penalties that resulted in automatic first downs. That's a lot.
I'm very annoyed now. I was feeling pretty good about how my broadcast went, and now I'm very annoyed that I didn't say that during the game. That he had to have broken the Torrey Smith Memorial record for drawing interference penalties, and I felt like Flacco would do that to Torrey Smith twice a game in Baltimore back in the day. But no, I mean, you could just see those guys could not cover Terry. I mean, his double moves. I mean, he had those guys in an absolute blender. And so for Jaden Daniels to only have that for 3 games, that's a very, very important combination for them. So the injuries are obviously a massive part of it. Defensively, they lack a decent amount. But, Dorrance Armstrong was playing well before he got hurt. So I think it's a combo, quite frankly, of the year before, they won all those last-second games, like the Hail Mary. They were so good on 4th down. they probably were more like a 9 or 10 win team last year that got a lot of breaks and things that went their way late in games. And in this year, they were probably more like a 6 or 7 win team that had a bunch of things go against them. You know, they're probably not as far off from the year before as like the 7 win delta would indicate.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. By the way, you had in the game something that I wrote down immediately when you said it, because that information isn't readily available. You almost have to do sort of your own back of the envelope math to figure it out. But you had that week 1 starter, 83-man games missed, the league leader in that. That's, people don't like when people discuss injuries as an excuse. I don't really view them as an excuse. I view them as a reason. Teams that get, decimated the way Washington was, they don't win more games than they lose. And those that do are the exception to the rule. And they didn't have their quarterback and their best receiver, not to mention their running back number 1, their wide receiver 2, their DNs 1, 2, and 3. I mean, it was carnage all season long. But I was going to ask you, and you started to get to that, but I want a little bit more, and that is, do you view Washington as a team that if they don't have what they had this year and they're relatively healthy in 2026, what kind of team is it? Jaden Daniels playing 17 games, Terry McLaurin playing 17 games. How far away are they?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that's really hard to answer without knowing who their coordinators are and what moves they make. The good news is, as I'm sure you guys talk about a lot, is that they have the most cap space in the NFL. The bad news is they got a ton of free agents,
Yeah, they do.
They have to, they have to use that money on a lot of their own guys if they want to keep them. It's not like they have 21 starters coming back and they have the most cap space. They have a lot of guys that are up. Now, what that does do is it gives Adam Peters a lot of flexibility. And I'm curious if he continues to go the veteran route and feels like, hey, Dan Quinn and I might both be on the hot seat this year. I'm going to keep going and hope that I have better luck on the 1-year veterans in 2026 than I did in 2025. Maybe it looks more like 2024. Or do they start to go younger? I think he's right about this. I think Peters realized, Kev, that older veterans on 1-year contracts are actually undervalued because they're older. And most people don't want to bring older guys onto the team. So, in other words, if a guy was going to give you the production, I'm just throwing this out there. Let's just say it's Bobby Wagner, okay? If Bobby Wagner was going to give you that many tackles and play the way he did, and he was 27, I don't know, what does he cost in a 1-year deal? 10 million, 15 million? I'm just making it up.
It was $9 million this year. Yeah.
Yeah. But if Bobby Wagner was 26, that would be 15 million a year. So I think that what they decided is at a lot of positions, Dietrich Wise, Jonathan Jones, yeah, we can pay top dollar for a younger guy in their prime, but we can probably get somebody that for this year, which is the only year that matters right now, that can give us comparable play for a lot less than that and create some value for ourselves. The problem with the older guys, which is why a lot of teams stay away, is they get hurt more often. That's the deal. They get hurt more often. And so that kind of happened. Like last year, they rolled the dice and it turned out great, with a lot of those older veterans. This year, they kind of got snake eyes. I don't know, is that good or bad? I think snake eyes is bad. I don't really roll
snake
dice.
eyes is not good. The irony of that is Bobby Wagner didn't miss a snap. Von Miller didn't miss a snap that he was asked to play in. The oldest guy that got injured the most, and he was productive certainly all of last year and this year before what was a devastating injury, was Zach Ertz. I mean, a lot of the injuries were to their mid-tier aged guys and their younger guys. See Jaden Daniels as an example for that. But I thought it was interesting the way you put it that, you know, older productive players like Bobby Wagner are actually really, true values for teams. But they do have all this cap space. There is a lot of question marks, plenty of them going into next year. And it really starts with the fact that 2 years into the Dan Quinn era, Ross, they are looking for a new defensive coordinator and a new offensive coordinator. Let's start with the OC. What do you think happens here?
Well, let me ask you this first, actually. Was there a drumbeat for people to move on from Kingsbury? Did people want this to happen? Are people glad that this happened? I mean, you're there. I'm not.
Well, let me ask you a question before I answer that. Do you think he did a good job here?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so do
Yeah.
I. So do I. And I think
I
thought
Jaden Daniels had the best rookie season for a quarterback in NFL history.
Agreed.
And actually, I thought Mariota and Josh Johnson, quite frankly, played well enough to win a bunch of those games. So not only did he have the best rookie year in NFL history with Daniels as a rookie, but then in year two, they were 3-2. Whether they go out to the Chargers or Rams and rolled them, and they had some good things going. And then the injury. By the way, they played a much tougher schedule. Like they played much tougher teams earlier in the year, much tougher defenses. And then Mariota played fine in a bunch of those games. And Josh Johnson even played, I thought, winning football in his 2 starts. A guy that it was his 10 to 11 starts everywhere, and he's a journeyman. So someone would have to explain to me why they moved on from Kingsbury, because that one I don't really understand. Now, reading about it, it sounds like Dan Quinn wants someone that's going to maybe huddle a little bit more, and maybe Dan Quinn felt like the no huddle or the up tempo and the style perhaps put strain on his defense. I don't really buy that, and I would not have gotten rid of Cliff Kingsbury if I were the Commanders. I would have been happy to keep him for year 3 with Jaden Daniels, hopefully a healthy year.
So I agree with everything you said. With respect to the question you asked me, I think it's split. Look, this is a fan base that finally kind of, we were asleep for a quarter century with the misery that Snyder brought to this once proud franchise. What the history of this franchise was. I mean, you played, at a time where it was still within sight of memory in the 90s. You were here in the early 2000s. I think that there's just a lot of people that were so pissed off with the entire season that they wanted everybody fired. I mean, it's Quinn, Kingsbury, Witt Jr., just a total house cleaning. So you always get that. And you're familiar with that in Philadelphia, being where you live. But I agree with you. I mean, I think we saw an elite level offense last year. The quarterback had a lot to do with it. But you know what? The quarterback typically has a lot to do with elite level top 5 offensive football teams. And to your point, you can say 2 things simultaneously. The offense wasn't anywhere near what it was last year, but given what he had to work with, I thought he got a lot more out of a lot less this year offensively. And ironically, I pointed to the 2 Josh Johnson performances. A 39-year-old third-string quarterback was highly productive in the final 2 games of the season, one of which you called. So, with all of that now digested, where do you think they go or should go?
Well, I think that one spot just opened up today, or one guy just opened up today. It's probably Mike McDaniel. I can see them wanting to bring Mike McDaniel back home to where he was there for a few years during the Shanahan era. There's probably a bunch of people that are going to want Mike McDaniel, and I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility, quite frankly, that Mike McDaniel gets a head coaching job. That wouldn't shock me. I don't think he will, but it wouldn't shock me if he did. So that's something to keep an eye on. But McDaniel would be one I would strongly consider. I'm trying to think. I don't even know. You have to tell me. The OC thing is always interesting because usually it's like everybody wants the pass game coordinator for the Rams, whatever that guy's name is, Shellhouse or whatever. People don't really know is the truth. They don't know because unless it's somebody that's already an OC somewhere else, you're basically saying, just give me whoever the next best guy is next to McVay out there. You know what I mean? Like, just give me whoever Kyle Shanahan talks to the most. Like that's really what they're doing because nobody really knows. And by the way, those guys might end up being terrible. Like the guy in Houston. Houston first had Slowick, who came from San Francisco. Then now they have Caley, who came from the Rams. Everybody's just trying to get. And I would do the same thing. Everybody's just trying to get somebody from the Shanahan McVay tree, which makes sense. I mean, those guys, their backup quarterbacks play well,
I said the same thing that you just said the other day, and it's so true. And that is, as fans of the sport, even people who are in media and a little bit maybe closer to it, it's one thing for us to have strong opinions about head coaches and even coordinators who have been who are currently coordinators, and there's a true record attached to them, a true resume. But when people start getting into position coaches, or I say this about GM candidates, when somebody's an assistant GM somewhere, and you start being declarative in opinion, it's performative. I'm sorry, we don't know. We have no idea on these people. People inside the sport know, and you can take some of that information. Like I will tell you right now, Ross Tucker, they love this guy, David Blau, inside their building. The guy that ended up being their quarterback's coach, close with Jaden. He came from Detroit. His star has sort of been ascending, but he hasn't been in that position. People inside the sport know. We don't know as much, but we do know Mike McDaniel. We do know that, like you said, Liam Cohen's staff or Sean's staff or Kyle's staff, that probably if you pluck somebody from there, there's a decent chance, but you're not guaranteed of it. But yeah, McDaniel would be a really interesting hire. He not only was here in Washington with Mike, he was in Atlanta with Kyle when Quinn was the head coach when they went to the Super Bowl. And Mike McDaniel has credited Dan Quinn for the most part, saving his life when he was at a very difficult point in his life with addiction and a drinking problem. He talked a lot about that in the buildup to the Miami-Washington game in Madrid. So, I mean, do you think McDaniel, Jaden Daniels, this offense would be a good fit?
I do, and I think because I think Daniels can do the timing and rhythm passing game that Tua could do.
Yeah.
But I think Daniels can also do the second part, the second reaction part of it that Tua could not do. And if you're Mike McDaniel and you're looking to coordinate somewhere, is there going to be a better option than the Commanders with Jaden Daniels? Is there going to be a better quarterback situation? Probably not.
Baltimore?
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, probably Baltimore.
I mean, those would be the two, right?
Yeah, those would certainly be the two. I would say, I guess I feel like Baltimore would come with standards isn't the right word, but there would certainly be more pressure, it feels like, in Baltimore because the guy's already been a two-time MVP and all of that stuff. And they fired the head coach. Whereas I think in Washington, they're not necessarily expecting to win the Super Bowl next year. Just get us back to, being in the mix for the playoffs and back to being competitive again, like like they hadn't been for a long time.
Yeah, agreed. All right, real quickly before I let you go, and I do want to talk about Front Page because I love your business. Ross is quite the entrepreneur in so many different ways. But on the playoffs that will start on Saturday, let's start in the NFC because you would agree, this is one of the wildest seasons we've had in a long time, and it's wide open. Do you agree with that part of it, that the postseason's wide open or not?
No question. Yep, I think you can make an argument for 12, maybe even 13 teams to win the Super Bowl.
Wow, that's a lot. So you would just exclude the Panthers, and who would be the other team? If it's 12, the Panthers, and who else would you exclude?
Maybe the Steelers.
All right, so let's start in the NFC. Who do you like and why to emerge in 3 weeks?
Well, there's three teams I think have a really good chance, right? I would be surprised if it's not the Seahawks, Rams, or Eagles. Those feel to me like the teams with the best opportunity. And they also have, the best path, I think. The Seahawks at home, obviously, and have the number 1 seed. The Rams get to play at Carolina. And the Eagles got to rest their guys, and then they're playing at home against a very beat-up Niners bunch. Very beat up. So they all have a terrific opportunity to get to the next round, to get to the divisional round. And I think the Seahawks have the easiest path. I think that the Rams probably have the best team overall. And I think the Eagles still have that pedigree, and they have sort of almost like a trump card that they haven't used in their back pocket, which is Hurts's legs. He has not run very much this year. It feels like they've kind of been saving that. And so I think, they will break that out now because they have to. It's go time.
If they don't move the football against that 49er defense, then that's a red flag even if they survive the game.
Totally agree. Yep. There's no question. That's 1,000% accurate. But, they might be winning these games 19-16. I mean, their defense is really good, really good.
It is.
So they do have a chance to win these games, with those type of scores.
AFC, who emerges and ends up being in the Super Bowl? Give me the 2 or 3 teams if it's 2 or 3 in the AFC.
It's 2, and it's the winner of the Bills-Jags game on Sunday.
Wow.
I think the winner of the Bills-Jags game is going to the Super Bowl. I think the Jags have the best team. People don't realize it because nobody pays attention to the Jags.
Right.
And then I think that the Bills have the best player, at least in the playoffs, in Josh Allen, capable of putting Superman's cape on and, carrying the team almost single-handedly at times. And so I think it's a shame, Kev, that they have to play against each other. I think it really stinks that they have to play against each other because I think that they're the 2 best teams in the AFC. I think that they would be in the AFC Championship game if, they didn't have to play against each other in the first round. So I'm taking the winner of that game to go all the way to the Super Bowl.
Do you like the Texans as much as I do?
I like the Texans defense quite a bit. I would say I still have some healthy skepticism of them offensively. They're going to have to win playoff games more than likely, 20-17, 19-16, stuff like that.
Ironically, I mean, I've loved him all season long and bet him a couple of months ago to win the AFC title, but I actually think the Steelers have a chance Monday night with Rodgers playing the way he's playing. All right, let's get to Russ Tucker is, and I'm being serious, he's quite the entrepreneur. This is, an Ivy League guy that played in the NFL that's very entrepreneurial, and one of your businesses is perfect, for this time of year with, certainly Valentine's Day right around the corner. Tell everybody about my Front Page story.
Yeah, so what you might not know about me, Kev, is I'm a big softie, right? And I think it's super important in life that you tell people how you feel about them. And in fact, look, we just had New Year's. I know for a fact a lot of people listening that one of their New Year's resolutions is to be a better husband or boyfriend or partner or whatever. And I think a lot of them also don't want to procrastinate. Well, let's check off both those New Year's resolutions with one fell swipe by going to myfrontpagestory.com. It's really the most unique, cool gift that I've seen. You go to myfrontpagestory.com, you either fill out a quick email or you talk to a writer on the phone, tell them how great your significant other is, your wife, whatever. They write this incredible story. It looks beautiful. It looks like it's on the cover of the Washington Post, framed pictures of you and them, maybe the kids if you have them, probably no kids if you don't. That'd be weird. But then to just say, honey, I want to do something special for you. So I had a story written about you. They start to well up with tears just when you hand it to them. And then when they read the quotes, like, I never thank her enough for all the little things she does. I wouldn't be who I am without her. They cry every time, dude. myfrontpagestory.com. If you want to have a gift that will move her to tears, it's myfrontpagestory.com, myfrontpagestory.com. At a minimum, just go there, throw your email address
No,
in.
it's cool. You and I have talked
send
about
you
it
a code,
before.
then you have-
Yeah. What does the headline say about the game that Ross Tucker's working this weekend? What do you got radio-wise?
I am the Keystone State Kid. On Sunday, I'm in the booth with Ian Eagle for Eagles Niners, and then I'll drive the entire length of the Turnpike, and I'm on the sideline Monday night for Texans Steelers. So thankfully for me, I live in the middle in Harrisburg, so I can sleep Sunday night in my own bed and then drive the rest of the way to Pittsburgh. And I like being on sideline a couple times a year during the playoffs. It's such a cool energy and vibe. And yeah, so the headline, I don't know, it'd be cool for my friends and family and people here in Central PA if Pennsylvania goes 2-0. I don't think that's going to be the case, but it'd be cool if it was.
You've done a great job all year, college and pro games. Appreciate you making time for us this week. Enjoy it. We'll talk soon.
Sounds great. Thank you, Kev.
Russ Tucker, everybody. When we come back, we will rank the AFC teams. I also may have a smell test pick. Wait, were we going to do Stanford Steve or not? Do we have time to do that or not?
27. If we go out now, yeah, we got some time.
All right, let's bring on Stanford Steve. He's headed to the Fiesta Bowl. We'll do that next. College football playoff game number 1 tonight, Fiesta Bowl, Miami and Ole Miss. Tomorrow night, Peach Bowl, Atlanta, Indiana, and Oregon. Stanford Steve will be there with College Game Day for both of them. He joins us right now. So before we get to the two matchups, what's your favorite game so far in the first 2 rounds of the playoffs, and what have we learned after those 8 games?
I was at Alabama, Oklahoma, which was tremendous. The ability to come back. I mean, Kevin, that building was as live as you can be with this pre-light show thing and everybody getting juiced up and Bama going down 17-0 and coming all the way back. I thought it was incredible in that environment, knowing what they had been up against, knowing how good Venables and that defense have been. But the next morning we flew overnight. And the next morning we were in College Station. And people have their thoughts about great games and what they like and what they don't like. But that game had everything. The physicality of A&M and Miami not budging either of them either way, both sticking to their guns. I didn't love the game plan from A&M offensively, not moving the quarterback around. But that game, that environment, knowing what those people were up against, and then seeing Miami come in, having been at that game, I towards to favor that, even though the Sugar Bowl was absolutely incredible. And that's where we have Miami playing Ole Miss out of those 2 games. And then as far as what have we learned, I think the bye week or the bye in the bracket is a little bit overblown. Indiana, obviously the only team that has won in the last 2 years. But when you go back and look at the numbers, 2 of those teams were double-digit dogs.
Right.
Last year with Arizona State and Boise. Georgia didn't have their quarterback last year. I thought they were in a brutal situation against a really good Notre Dame team that ended up going to the final. You look at this year, Indiana comes out, looks a little rusty that first series, but they're Indiana, man. They play mistake-free football, and that's part of the deal. And then, what we have the day before, Ohio State, I thought Miami just dictated. I thought Ohio State got away from the ground game when they finally got success, but the way that Miami has perfected in shrinking games, I think has been really, really evident and a thing that really works. Like, I'm sure you're going to talk NFL playoffs. That formula has worked forever in playoff football, no matter what level it is. And then I got a chance to, fly and travel with Coach Saban and ask him about what's the deal. And he swears the bye week teams practice too much. And it's a very fine line, with the way these things are. And, kids, jumping in the portal January 2nd, but keeping their attention span and not practicing too much. And, he tended to think the more success he had was at the end of his career and going to these glorified walkthroughs where you're doing everything on the board and in the film room, and then you're basically just walking through everything and saving the kids' bodies, which I think has come to fruition because when you look at who's left, they're as physical as there is, but they're playing their best ball of the year in Oregon, Miami, Indiana, and Ole Miss.
Yeah, I think your point about and for those that aren't following it, 4 quarterfinal games are played at bowl sites, not home venues like the first round. And out of the 8 quarterfinal games in the 2 years of the 12-team playoff, we've had 7 lower-seeded teams beat higher-seeded teams. Only Indiana has, as a higher-seeded team, won a quarterfinal game. But to your point, last year we didn't have a seeding based on strength. We had automatic seeding with conference champions Arizona State and Boise State. They were big underdogs, and you already pointed out Georgia's injuries against Notre Dame and Ohio State. I think a lot of us thought Ohio State was better than Oregon in that other game. Yep. And then, this year, we had some great games. Look, you mentioned the A&M Miami game. I want to point out that very early in the season when you were on with me and you convinced me, and I rode this horse for like 4 or 5 weeks, you said you thought Miami might be the best team in the country, that up front in the trenches, both sides of the ball, that they were just a grown man team. And I was like, you know what? They'll have an experienced quarterback who can sling it. Whatever you say about Carson Beck and whatever the intangible, lacking thereof is with him, he can spin it. Like, he can make every throw. If you protect him and everything's good around him, it works. So I was on Miami, and then they lost to Louisville with him throwing 4 picks, and they lost to SMU in overtime with him throwing that pick. But that game against A&M, it's not for everybody 10-3, but I thought that was start to finish one of the most intense, physically hard-hitting games. You mentioned the A&M OC. I was screaming the whole game, just give the ball to Fletcher between the tackles, because it worked early and they got away from it. And then they got to it in the final drive of the game. But that's one of the best 10-3 games I've ever watched. It was so intense. And then, by the way, so was Miami's win over Ohio State. That game was a grown man game in the trenches too. I loved it. Both of those games.
Yeah, and I think the biggest factor is Miami dictated.
Yeah.
When you look and dissect these games, I watched the Cotton Bowl back, 5 times now. Ohio State didn't have many chances.
No.
And, that's because of what Miami did. And people are talking all year about, and that's why you really don't know until these teams get here. We heard historical defense, and I'm thinking about all the defenses we've seen at Ohio State and the talent they put in the NFL. And my whole thing all year with Ohio State was I didn't see the NFL difference makers up front on the defensive line. And then this Arvell Reese comes into the mix, and he's a freak show. He's probably going to be a top 10 pick, maybe top 5. But Miami walked in and it manhandled them. They did whatever they wanted, and I thought Dawson learned a lot from that A&M game, Kevin, because he learned to trust. It's really hard to do, man. When you're on the road, there's 110,000. A&M's as good of a fan base in the home stadium as there is, and this is a one and done for you, man. And he found his guys, and they leaned on him, and then Malachi Tony fumbles, and Fletcher goes over to him and said, "Don't worry about this. I got this. Give me the football." And when I look at Beck, I'm with you. He's shown that he can do it, but look at this. He's thrown for 241 yards in 2 games combined, 2 touchdowns. One of them was that flip, the flip to Tony that ended up winning the A&M.
Right. Yeah.
He has one pass play over 20 yards, and they've looked dominant. So Mario has a team that he absolutely loves. He's this big bravado guy and a former offensive lineman. He loves the trenches. He loves it because he knows that goes on the road and wins games like it did at A&M, and it wins big games like it did against Ohio State. So, the physicality that Miami has brought to, I look at that as being the biggest challenge for Ole Miss in this Fiesta Bowl. They have to find a way to compound that, because with Ole Miss, people want to talk about styles of fighters. I've heard Floyd Mayweather against Tyson. But at some point, the guy who likes to dance around and spread things out, they have to attack. Now, how do you attack? Do you throw the football down the field and have success? Or do you pound it right at them and use Miami's girth against them? Can you run it wide? But Miami has been so sound defensively, and the new defense coordinator, Heatherman, has been incredible. They are as simple as there is. They line up their 4 down guys, and they say, beat us. So that's the biggest matchup to me with Ole Miss. Ole Miss's offensive line and Trinidad against that Miami defense.
Back to Carson Beck for one moment. Like, he did not necessarily participate in a big way in the win over A&M. But stats aside, against Ohio State, where he only threw for 138 yards, he was crucial on a lot of those third down conversions. I think they went 50% on third down. And with his arm and with his legs, he made big play after big play in that game. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. No doubt. And we're sitting there last year, and, Penn State Notre Dame game. Again, and it's a really, the time is there, you're backed up, and, do you go for this? And Penn State and James Franklin, they went for it. And what happened? The quarterback made the biggest mistake of the season. Yeah. And I believe when you have a team built like Miami has, the court just don't turn it over. There's a couple 3 and outs. Our defense could buckle down in the red zone and
Right.
get us 3, when we need stops. But you can't keep giving the ball. You can't give, especially Ole Miss. I mean, look at what they do with extra possessions in any of these teams. Indiana's the king of the turnover margin. Oregon feasted off it in the Orange Bowl. So as long as and you know what else? Miami's so comfortable with that. Now that you've seen it, now that they've gone through a couple losses, why'd they lose? Because they turned the ball over like crazy.
Yeah.
They've really found themselves, and I give them a lot of credit. And Mario has had plenty of detractors. I give him a ton of credit, man. He went out and got 2 great coordinators, and the system is working, and they're playing by how they play. They didn't have 1 penalty against Ohio State, and I think they went for over 90 penalties this year, not 1.
Well, there were hardly any penalties called in the game, period, which was one of the best parts of that game. Look, I am still waiting for Mario Cristobal to step on his you-know-what when it matters, with a clock management or, something of a game-impacting decision from the sideline. But he hasn't done it yet. Real quickly, before we get to your thoughts on each of these matchups, because Ruben Bain, had this dominant game against Ohio State, and he's had an unbelievable season, and he's going to be a top 10 pick, and Washington now has number 7 overall. Just give me your thoughts on Ruben Bain as a pro prospect.
It's all going to come down to Ruben Bain and Mesidor, his teammate, and then David Bailey from Texas Tech. Everybody, it's going to be Victor Poison. I think it's a lot like the quarterback situation when they took Daniels and May was out there, Caleb went first, the whole thing. The one thing I will say is Bailey from Texas Tech has more twitch.
Yeah, agreed.
He's a better pass rusher.
Yep.
Bain is a
physical
power. A lot of bad words are used to describe a guy that good. He's all of it. But the best part is talking to the Miami staff and how he goes about his business. He's an old school kid. He wants to be coached hard. He wants to be yelled at. He wants to know what he did wrong. And I found that so refreshing to hear in this day and age. And we're in the middle of the portal right now, and all we hear about is who wants how much money. So that you're not getting a diva, kid that's been a 5-star the whole way. This kid's worked his butt off, and I don't see any of those 3 guys being bad picks. It's going to come down for preference of a defense.
I totally agree with you on Bailey. He just strikes me much more as the quick twitch edge, the guy that's going to beat you, with speed as much as he does anything else. All right, let's get to the 2 matchups. I mean, you picked Miami early in the year. I thought they were the best team in the country, too. I rode you on that, and then they disappointed us. In the Louisville and the SMU games. Hell, the truth is they were lucky to win a couple of other games they were involved in, including what was the game that they barely won at the end? I'm kind of forgetting right now. I'm blanking. Florida State. They barely beat Florida State, which was a close game. So the matchup between Miami and Ole Miss Thursday night in the Fiesta Bowl, who wins and why?
I mentioned how important the Ole Miss defensive line or offensive line is. My biggest factor for them, and I thought that one of the advantages was Golding taking over and putting more of an onus on the defense. Because when I look back, Kevin, I was at the first game with Ole Miss in Georgia. The middle of their defense, the kid Daugherty, linebacker, and Perkins, their playmaker who runs all over the field. In game 1, Daugherty played 86 snaps. The other night in the Sugar Bowl, he only played 69. Perkins played 70 in the first game, 50 the other night. Eccles and Harris, the 2 D tackles, played 75 and 73 snaps. In the Sugar Bowl, they only played 60 and 52. They found a way to get those guys reps, and look how much better they were in the fourth quarter. If you remember that first game, they got worn out. Trinidad couldn't find a receiver, and Georgia blasted them in the fourth quarter. So right away, it didn't look pretty with Golding in the first half. You saw him ripping his defense. But I'll tell you what, man, in the heat of the moment where he's never made decisions like that, he was spot on with making adjustments. And if you remember, going back, I watched this game too, when Georgia out of back-to-back national championships, they go to Ole Miss at 24, back against Golding, and Golding shut him down. He really confused Beck. And Beck only averages 7 yards per target. So when I went back and watched that game, I charted it against that Ole Miss defense and Golden calling the shots. Carson Beck was 5 of 10 for 92 yards with a pick, no touchdown.
Wow.
On 10+ yards throws down the field.
That was 24. That was last year.
Yep. That was at Ole Miss, and Georgia's only loss in that whole win streak before they got beat by who did they lose? They lost to Notre Dame.
Yeah, in the semifinals
or in the playoff. So there is
Quarterfinals.
familiarity. I do think that Ole Miss defense in 24 is better than this one in 25, but give me Trinidad Chambliss compared to Jackson Dart. I love what I've seen from this offense. They know who they are. They're not afraid. They have plenty of weapons. Lacey's the key. Can they run the football to keep that defense off the field? Because that defense is, to Miami's point, and wanting to run the football, they're going to have to be fresh. Special teams are kind of even. The kid from Ole Miss kicked the hell out of the ball.
Yeah.
The kid from Miami, I thought, made a couple big kicks.
Yep.
Against Ohio State off of that wind tunnel down in College Station. But I think I believe the physicality wins over, Kevin, with Miami and how they have dictated. I think it's way harder to do than people say. You know, like the Ravens Steelers game the other night, right? Oh, just give the ball to Derrick Henry 40 times. Well, he didn't do anything in the second half, right? So you got to have another plan B. And Miami has been so persistent in that run game that I think it's going to be too much to handle for Ole Miss over the course of 60 minutes. It's boring. Miami's the favorite, but I like Miami.
All right, let's go to the Peach Bowl Friday night, Indiana, Oregon, in the rematch. I think that was even more than, the last, fourth quarter game-winning drive against Penn State. That was the moment when they went on the road and beat Oregon this year where you're like, wow, they're good again this year. So do they make it 2 times in one season over the same opponent? Does Indiana win?
It's hard to be hold back your recency bias, but being at the Rose Bowl for Indiana, that was my third or fifth game in 2 years. Just watching them and how sound they are, Kevin. When you look at them pregame, there's no BS with headphones and dances and this guy's got to throw at this guy. Like everybody is just so focused on the goal, and that's winning a football game. The one thing about them, seeing them in person, and I think it really stuck out against Alabama, their skill guys are way better than people give them credit for. I mean, Surratt, I don't think he's going to run a great time in a 40, but man, he is so dead on in contested catches. Cooper's a guy, you saw him make the catch against Penn State, but he's got pro goods. And then this Becker kid has come out of nowhere. Surratt doesn't play against Penn State. Cooper makes that catch on the sideline Becker makes the play on the sideline before the Cooper touchdown.
Yeah.
So Mendoza has full trust. I love what they do with their tight end and offensive line. I think it's great. All their runs are straight downhill. So these teams that want to move around, they're going to catch you. And you saw that as the game wore on with Alabama. With that lack of size, they're trying to move around. They're as buttoned up an operation as there is in their defense. Getting a chance to know their defense coordinator, Brian Hayes, who is making a lot of money for himself. He told me before the game, I was talking to him, I said, I feel like you should be confident, against Alabama's offensive line. No, that's a weakness. And he's like, yeah, but we lost our stud in that Daly kid who got hurt in the celebration after the Big Ten title game. And he said, but I just want to keep my goal the main goal. And he said, my goal every game is to make the opposing offensive line not be able to sleep because of what just happened in the game. And he did it again against Alabama. So the familiarity in this game and being at that game in Eugene, I thought Oregon was taken back by the physicality. I mean, Indiana lives off of making plays in your backfield, and Indiana lived in Dante Moore's face. They had 6 sacks, 7 TFLs. They dictated on the road in that environment. And I think there's a sound confidence with Indiana that comes from the head coach and goes all the way down. So again, it's boring, but everybody's going to throw, hard to beat a team twice. That team that's been beaten the first time has had success, as we've seen in the playoff with Alabama winning, Ole Miss winning. But I just trust Indiana a lot more. Oregon's been a great story. I thought they've done a great job of adapting, losing receivers, and then getting going with the run game. But that offensive line didn't look good against Texas Tech, and Indiana's as sound as there is on the defensive side. So I side with Indiana.
Stanford Steve 82 at Stanford Steve 82 on X on Twitter. Window Nation's offering 4 free with every 4 purchased, and you don't have to pay anything for 2 years. No money down, no payments, and no interest charged for 2 years. If you need new windows, I highly recommend Window Nation. Just give them a chance to come out and give you a free estimate. 86690Nation and windownation.com. No smell test pick tonight on Miami Ole Miss. I will have a couple of picks on tomorrow night's game, along with all of the playoff picks on tomorrow's show. Mike McDaniel's available, everybody. Right now, I would say McDaniel or Blau. If you ask me to nail down 2 finalists or 2 favorites, those would be the 2. McDaniel and or David Blau, maybe co-favorites for the OC job. We'll have to wait because McDaniel's going to interview for some head coaching opportunities, I would guess. Chris Russell's next.